Hi everyone, Brian here, and today we're going to be going through a flip through of two decks that are related to the I Ching, and also we're going to be having a look at this translation of the I Ching, which is by Rudolf Ritsima and Stephen Karcher. And the reason I want to do this is that the two decks that I'm going to show you are to some extent illustrated decks, and I thought it would be interesting for us to compare and contrast the illustrations and also to see how they compare with what's actually written in an I Ching text. So the two decks that I'm going to be talking about today are the I Ching cards, which are by Klaus Holitzka and Marlies Holitzka. So this is the Holitzka I Ching deck, and also the Tao Oracle by Ma Deva Padma, who of course illustrated the Osho Zen Tarot. Now, a while ago I flipped through the Barbara Walker I Ching of the Goddess cards, and I have got a couple of those to hand here to talk about and compare with the cards that we're going to look at. Not because I want to compare all three decks, we're not going to do that, but because I thought it would be interesting for us to just see how different illustrators interpret the same images from the I Ching. And I'll start by saying that, of course, the I Ching is a very old divination tool, and it isn't traditionally based around imagery in the sense that tarot is. On tarot cards, obviously, even in pip decks we have illustrated trumps, and in later decks we have the pips illustrated as well after Rider-Waite very often. With the I Ching is a process of building up hexagrams. That's what these little things are on the back of this deck, which are a series of 6 lines, hence the name hexagram, which are built from the bottom up, and they're built by a number of different ways. One way, a very traditional way, is to have a set of yarrow stalks and to sort those into different patterns and to use that to build up the hexagrams. And a slightly easier and quicker way is to do it on the basis of tossing 3 coins, and each of the configurations that the coins might land in, so all heads or all tails or 2 tails and 1 head or 2 heads and 1 tail, tell you whether the line that is to be drawn is an unbroken line or a broken line, as can be seen in these hexagrams. And then also, depending on the way that the coins land, you can work out whether the line is going to stay unbroken or stay solid, or will change into its opposite, and that can in some cases give you a second hexagram. So you're either going to be dealing with 1 or 2 hexagrams in your interpretation, which is a bit like dealing with 1 or 2 tarot cards. And the I Ching text will have in it a translation, or at least an iteration of what the hexagram looks like and what it means. In a sense, what it does is it paints a word picture, and from that word picture you start the process of divination, and you receive advice from the I Ching. Now, with these cards, what's happened, as in the Barbara Walker cards, the deck creators have translated the hexagrams into an image. They have interpreted the hexagrams and have created an image as a result. And on the one hand, the plus point of this is that it can make the I Ching, which to some can feel rather abstract and difficult to get into, it can make the I Ching very accessible. And if you're used to working with tarot cards or oracle cards, then having a deck that illustrates the I Ching hexagrams can be a good way into this divination system. The downside of it, of course, is that the moment an artist translates and interprets an image in a particular way, to some extent they'll lock that image into that particular interpretation. It's a bit like when a film is made of your favourite novel. Any novel that we read, of course, conjures images in our own minds about what the characters look like, what the settings look like, and although they'll be broadly the same across many different readers because the author will have constructed descriptions in a particular way, in many cases what we'll find when a film is made is we look at the film and think, gosh, that's just not at all how I imagined it. Or sometimes we'll look and say, oh, that's just it, perfect, they've got it perfectly. So there are pluses and minuses from having illustrated versions of anything that isn't originally a visual thing, or at least not a concrete visual thing on paper. So let's have a look at the two decks. And I'm not going to give you an awful lot of background about these decks simply because it's easy enough to look up the detail of the decks online. And what I'm going to focus on instead is the actual imagery in the decks, so that you can compare and contrast, and you'll see that they do have very different styles. One is much more simplified and abstract than the other, which has slightly more concrete imagery. Both of them, I will say, are very nice decks indeed, and if you're at all interested in the I Ching, and you would like the idea of having the I Ching in an illustrated tarot style or oracle style deck, then either one of these is well worth investing in, and hopefully from this review and flip through you'll get a sense of which would be your preference. But I'm going to start off by talking about this hexagram, and this is the first hexagram in this sequence. There are different sequences of hexagrams depending on the tradition, and you'll find that Barbara Walker uses a slightly different sequence, although some of them are the same. So the numbering is different. This is number 1 in both of these cases, and indeed in the Barbara Walker deck, but once you get past this, the numbering changes. These two stay the same, but in the Barbara Walker deck it diverts into something different. So be aware of that, and remember that when you're trying to compare and contrast, you're not comparing and contrasting the number of the hexagram, you're comparing and contrasting the hexagram itself. So this is the one that has 3 unbroken lines on the bottom trigram. Each half is called a trigram, and also 3 unbroken lines on the top half, and so we have a hexagram of 6 unbroken lines, and we see it represented here in the image and also here at the bottom of the card. And in the I Ching text you see that it's also illustrated here, and the name of this in the text that I've got here is force, or Qian, and here it's the creative, and it says here the active yang principle, strength, tenacity, dynamism, inspiration, heaven, masculinity, authority, or father. So there are keywords on this deck. Here we just have the image, there's no real keyword. There are details obviously in the guidebook that go with this, but this is far more abstract than this. This tells you something already about what this hexagram is likely to mean. And I'll read you what it says in this translation, just so you've got an idea of what it is, the kind of thing that the artist would have been working with. So it says, the hexagram describes your situation in terms of the primal spirit power that both creates and destroys. It emphasizes that dynamic, unwearied persisting, the action of force, is the adequate way to handle it, to be in accord with the time you are told to persist. And here it gives the image of the situation. Spring growing harvesting trial, and various keywords. Spirit power, creative and destructive, unceasing forward motion, dynamic, enduring, untiring, firm, stable, heaven, sovereign, father. Also it can mean dry up, parched, exhausted, cleared away. So it gives you an idea of different kind of context here. And it says the ideogram, so the idea behind the hexagram, sprouts or vapours rising from the ground, and sunlight, both fecundating moisture and scorching drought. So real contrasts here in terms of tension. Force is the heaven trigram doubled, so the 3 unbroken lines is the heaven trigram, and includes that trigram's attribute. The symbol is heaven, Tien, the highest, sky, firmament, heavens, power above the human as opposed to earth, Ti, below, the great and the one above. So quite a lot of different connotations there. So that's the kind of energy that both of the deck creators will have been working with, and you can see some of that reflected here in this palm of the hand, with these images, the cosmos inside the hand, and these waves of, I guess, power, light emanating from it. There's something about this actually that reminds me of the Magician card in the tarot, which is appropriate, of course, for being the first hexagram. But there's more that you can interpret in terms of intuition, I think, in this card than there is specifically in this one. And just by way of contrast and interest, here is the same trigram illustrated by Barbara Walker in the Barbara Walker Tarot. And you know, the sense here of somebody with a key to the cosmos is here again, somebody with the Ankh key of life. There's a mountain with what looks like a castle in the background, different roses, I guess, entwining, and there's something otherworldly and heaven-like about this, appropriate for air over air, heaven, air, sky, authority. So, oops, I beg your pardon for knocking you. Okay, so that's the number one. So let's just have a look now at number two in these two decks. And what we have here now is the two trigrams are two sets of broken lines, and that's illustrated here below, and here we have it there. And this is about receptive, the yielding yin principle, whereas number one was the yang, here's the yin: devoted, patient, supportive, obedient, responsive, intuitive, earthy, mother. So something feminine here, perhaps akin to the Empress card, although we're not talking about the same number in tarot. And here we have, well, I would say there is something slightly more suggestive in this, because what we have is the three unbroken, the two sets of three unbroken lines together as three, and we have something that looks very much like a receptacle, and actually could also look like female reproductive organs in terms of the way that this has been set out. Not literally, of course, but in terms of symbols. And we have a very feminine looking card here as well, with the round belly and the breasts and so on. And again, let's just have a look at what it says in the book, just so that we've got an idea of what might have been being worked with here. And this one, it says in the book, this hexagram describes your situation in terms of the primal structuring power confronted with many forces and obstacles. It emphasizes that giving way in order to serve and yield results, the action of field, is the adequate way to handle it, to be in accord with the time you are told to yield. So whereas number one was about persisting, this is about yielding. So very much associated here with feminine yin kind of energy. Associated context, it says here, surface of the world, concrete extension, basis of all existence, where force or heaven exerts its power, all involving service, earth, moon, wife, mother, courtiers, servants, etc. So, and some of the images: a field, spring growing, harvesting, a female horse's trial, a lord harvesting, acquiring, partnering, various different things here. Female sexual organ, particularly of farm animals, concave, hollow, the ideogram, cattle and ladle, a hollow reproductive organ. So we can see some of that in the imagery. Now, interestingly, in the Barbara Walker Tarot, this hexagram isn't number one. In fact, it's the last hexagram. It's number 64. And this is about nature, earth, creation, and kun. And, you know, what you can see here is, I think if we were to look at this, we wouldn't necessarily immediately think in the way that we might have thought about these two, or indeed of the interpretation, where the female power is yielding and is hollow and is receptive. Because here we have a female figure with a trident who seems to be in charge of this, you know, in a pit of lava, who seems unperturbed by the fact that she's standing on the edge of a pit of what looks like lava, with this huge snake. And just the image suggests to me straight away that this person is in charge of the snake, that the snake is devoted to her. So here's something about yielding, giving power. And I think, you know, that of course is what the I Ching is telling us, that sometimes the right thing to do is yield if we want to be empowered. But that's made very overt here. And this image actually reminds me very much of the Strength card in the tarot deck. So an interesting kind of contrast from Barbara Walker, who of course is, you know, the point of her I Ching deck is to reclaim the goddess tradition and the feminine. So she takes a different approach, which makes it so interesting to look at and contrast. So we'll just have a look at a couple more in terms of, oh, the light's just gone up. That's probably not a bad thing. Just so I'll flip through them. I'm not going to stop at every one. We are going to have a look at a couple more just by way of contrast, just so that you've got an idea of how it all works. But I'll just flip through. If any of these are images that you are particularly interested in knowing more about, then please do pause the video, have a look, go and do some research, look up your own deck of I Ching cards if you have it, or your copy of the I Ching if you have it. Again, much more abstract images on the left than on the right, but we do see some similarities. You know, here's somebody treading, and what we see here also is we're now, I'm on the wrong one, haven't I? So here we are, there's 10. So, you know, we've got different kind of images, but there's some similarities. The idea of a figure with, you know, standing, possibly walking. This looks like quite a high energy card. There's lots of movement in the lines of the card, and here's somebody walking across what looks like a fairly choppy sea on a tightrope. So something there about balance. So keep on going. So if you're into more abstract imagery, clearly this is the one that you would be potentially looking for. And if you're into more colourful, slightly more interpretive imagery, then the one on the right is one that may well be up your street. So here is one that's perhaps worth having a look at, because this one is contemplation. And again, you know, could this be somebody kind of at the top of a mountain contemplating, thinking in a kind of meditative state, you know, hand on the head, almost kind of energy in the head. And here we have a lone figure walking through a forest, trying to think. And if I just look up in the book, we'll have a look and see what the image here is, if you bear with me. Yeah, so here we have viewing Kuan. Let's just double check that we're on the right one. Yes, we are. So the hexagram describes your situation in terms of something seen from a distance, out of immediate reach. It emphasises that carefully observing and divining the meaning is the adequate way to handle it. To be in accord with the time, you are told to view. The ideogram, sea and water bird, observe through air or water. Wash the hands before a sacramental act. Ablutions, a basin. Joins and contrast two terms. So there are some similarities there, and in the Barbara Walker Tarot we have this image of what looks like a temple with robed figures contemplating a chalice under the light of a crescent moon. So very peaceful, lovely colours in this card. Some of the Barbara Walker imagery is really quite disturbing, but this is really rather beautiful and restful. So there are definite links, as you can see, between these cards. So we'll keep going. And again, please do stop the video if you would like to see any of these cards more closely. So now here's an interesting one, the corners of the mouth, nourishment, health, well-being, and here, although this isn't a mouth in terms of the figure's head is here, there is that shape, the bowed shape is still there. So again, some of the imagery does definitely cut across both ways. Oops. Lovely images, and definitely if you are a fan of the Osho Zen Tarot on this deck on the right, you will definitely recognise the style of art, the energy of the art, very much Ma Deva Padma's trademark kind of artwork. I'm not doing a great job of not bashing the camera as I go, but we'll just carry on. The thing about these decks is that, you know, there are different ways of using them, obviously. You can either generate the hexagrams through the traditional way of the I Ching, using coins or yarrow stocks. Coins would be more likely, I think, for most of us. And there are various instructions online to do that. And then what you would do is you would look up the relevant card, the respective card. But the other way of doing it would be to treat them very much like an oracle deck or a tarot deck, and just shuffle the cards and draw the one that you wanted. So again, by way of contrast, let's have a look. Determination, there's real energy and kind of almost a sense of championship in this card. Looks like somebody using a hula hoop or something, but certainly a very strong, powerful energy. And here we have resoluteness, determination, no compromises, unwavering focus, inner resolve. And here in the Barbara Walker deck we have resolution, and we have an interesting, again slightly disturbing image. We have a pile of bones on the top of this darkened mountaintop, semi-naked figure seemingly crawling and reaching towards what looks like a rainbow bridge that leads to this mountain that's got light and a castle and presumably safety on it. But there are questions, of course, about is that an actual bridge, or is it literally just a rainbow, in which case this guy would not be able to get across it. So interesting to look at the way different images are interpreted. So we'll keep going. And again, if you've got experience of these decks, or if you know of other I Ching decks that are on there, that are out there that you have used, then, you know, please do share information. Obvious similarities there. Do share your information with us. Let us know which one do you prefer and why. How do you use them? Do you use them using the traditional method of divining the hexagrams using the coins or the yarrow stocks, or do you instead you know, shuffle the cards and choose them at random? Do you use these as oracle cards? Do you pair them with other oracles? Do you pair them with tarot? And what are your thoughts on the process of illustrating the I Ching like this in the first place? Is it a good idea, or is it a bad idea, or is it just, you know, neither one or the other? All of that would be very much interesting to hear from you about. In both cases, in both decks, there are pretty thorough guidebooks, so if you're interested in learning more about either deck, they come with the guidebook, well packaged. This one even comes with a little blue drawstring bag, which is rather nice. It comes in this. So, you know, they are well worth investing in. And that's the end of this deck, and we have 3, or is it 4, blank cards. I'm not quite sure why we've got 4 blank cards. It may just be a printing issue, or it may be for you to illustrate something for yourself. I haven't got to the part of the book that explains that yet. But overall, that is my walkthrough of the 2 sets of I Ching cards, and you know, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are. Do you use the I Ching? What do you think of these cards? What do you think of other cards? And with that said, I'll be back very soon. Take care. Bye.